Hello and welcome to The Explainer. Today we are going on a really special and I think incredibly important journey. We're going to become architects, but we're not building with brick and mortar. We're going to be deconstructing and then hopefully rebuilding the very foundations of our most important relationships. Drawing on the profound insights of author and psychological counselor Steve Shih, we're going to tackle a question that, honestly, most of us probably try to avoid. It's a question that cuts right to the heart of what it means to live a good life. And that question is, are you truly living seriously? Now, that might sound a little heavy, but stick with me. It's really about looking past the day-to-day chaos, past the to-do lists and the distractions, and really examining the quality of the connections that genuinely define our happiness. We're talking about our bond with our partner, our relationship with our parents, and maybe the most fundamental one of all, the one we have with ourselves. So get comfortable. Let's really dive into this. This quote right here is our blueprint. It's our starting point for everything we're going to talk about today, to live seriously. Let's just sit with that for a second. What does Steve Shih actually mean by that? It's not about being stern or humorless, not at all. It's about adopting what he calls a rational approach to life. It's about being intentional. Think about it like this. You have a finite amount of energy, a finite amount of time. Living seriously means you consciously figure out which pillars are holding up the roof of your personal well-being, and then you deliberately, intentionally pour your resources into making those pillars stronger. And the author argues pretty convincingly that for almost every single one of us, our relationship with our romantic partner and our relationship with our parents are directly, powerfully linked to our quality of life, to that happiness index he mentions. They are, from an objective standpoint, two of the most critical projects of our lives. And yet, how many of us actually study them? How many of us give our marriage or our connection with our mom and dad the same kind of focused effort we'd give to getting a promotion or learning a new skill? To live seriously is to decide right now to stop letting these cornerstones of our happiness just drift along on autopilot. So here's the path we're going to walk today. This is our roadmap. First, we'll really dig into what it means to answer that call to live seriously. Then we're going to unmask a really common but often invisible problem, the false relationship. After we've identified the problem, we're going to look at solutions, building a bridge to closeness, with some incredibly practical tools. From there, the journey turns inward, toward the essential dialogue with self. Then we'll look back to understand how love and scars from parents shape who we are today. And finally, we'll bring it all together to chart the path to real connection. It's a journey, for sure, but a worthwhile one. Let's get started. Okay, so let's begin with that big central question that the author is asking every single one of us to confront. It's a bit of a gut check question, really. In the middle of our incredibly busy, demanding lives, are we actually living seriously? Or are we just, living, just going through the motions? According to the author, a whole lot of us are living unseriously. And again, he's not saying we're being silly or lazy. He means we're living on a kind of default setting, on autopilot. And in doing so, we're accidentally neglecting the very things that are most directly tied to our own happiness. Just think about it for a minute in your own life. We pour countless hours into our jobs, right? We stress about deadlines, we work late, we strategize. We meticulously plan our finances, we budget, we check our accounts. But what about the relationship with our partner? So often, we just let it coast. We assume it'll take care of itself even when there are obvious problems, even when we feel that little pang of distance growing. And what about our parents? We might call, we might visit for holidays, we perform the duties. But do we really invest the focused energy it takes to truly connect with them as people? And then there's the big one, maybe the most critical relationship of all, the one we have with ourselves. As the author observes from his counseling practice, so many people go through their entire lives without ever truly getting to know their own inner world. They don't understand their emotional triggers, their deepest needs, their own personality. They're so caught up in the external demands of life that the inner voice just becomes quiet background noise. And this, in the author's view, is the very definition of not living seriously. So this failure to live seriously, this tendency to be on autopilot, it very often leads to a really specific and incredibly common problem. It creates a relationship that, from the outside, looks perfectly fine. It looks real. But on the inside, it's hollow. The author calls this the illusion of closeness.
The author gives this phenomenon a specific name in Mandarin, 假性亲密关系. Or the best way to think about that in English is as a pseudo-intimate relationship. Now, this isn't some formal diagnosis you'd find in a textbook, but it so perfectly captures this feeling. On the surface, the two people are completely intertwined. They live together, share bills, maybe they're married, raising kids, posting happy photos online. But beneath that shiny surface, a huge gap has formed. It's a relationship where there are more and more topics you just can't discuss. There are emotions you absolutely cannot express. And there's this growing, quiet sense of distrust or insecurity that you both try really hard to ignore. It's the very definition of being together but alone. The relationship becomes a landscape filled with carefully avoided conversational minefields. You know the ones I'm talking about. Money, sex, that one annoying in-law, the future. You just don't go there. This isn't just a relationship cooling off. It's a chronic condition where real emotional problems exist, they persist, but they are never truly seen, never named, and so they are never solved. It allows a relationship that could be deep and meaningful to just stall out in a state of cautious, polite, emotional distance.
Now, here's what's so fascinating and maybe a little convicting about this idea. It highlights a massive trap that I think we all can fall into. Society gives us a script for love, a checklist for what intimacy is supposed to look like. You have the candlelit dinners, you buy the chocolates and roses on Valentine's Day, you have the big, expensive, grand wedding. And we perform these rituals, we check off the boxes, and then we assume that because we've done the things, we must have the thing. We must have intimacy. But the author's point is so crucial here. These are just the symbols. They're the wrapping paper. True intimacy, the actual gift inside the box, is something else entirely. It's determined by the quality of the relationship itself, the depth of your emotional connection, the raw honesty of your communication, and that solid foundation of mutual understanding and trust that you have to build together brick by brick. The real tragedy is that our education, both at home and in school, almost never teaches us how to build this real intimacy. So what do? We default to what we can see, what we can imitate, the rituals, and we end up mistaking the performance of love for the feeling of love.
So why does this happen? Why do so many relationships that start with real love end up feeling, well, fake? The author, based on his experience with countless couples, boils it down to 3 fundamental traits. Let's break these down one by one. First, and this is a big one, they don't truly know themselves. The author says when he asks his clients a simple question, what does your ideal relationship actually look like? He's often met with a completely blank stare. So many people get into serious relationships or even get married not because of a clear, internal, personal desire, but because of external pressures. Pressure from family, from society, from that little voice that says everyone else is doing it. The mindset is often, well, let's just get married and we'll figure out the rest later. They haven't done the essential inner work to understand what they truly need and want from a partner. Second, they don't truly know each other. They might be formally close, they've lived in the same house for years, but they are effectively strangers when it comes to the things that actually matter. Their real views on money, on sex, on how to raise children, their deepest values and fears. They just operate on a series of assumptions until a major conflict blows up, and suddenly they're forced to talk, and they have this shocking realization, oh my God, I think I'm married to a stranger. And third, they have unresolved personal psychological issues. We all have a past, and our upbringing especially creates an emotional blueprint for how we handle things like expressing love, trusting others, and dealing with conflict. If those issues from our past are left unexamined and unresolved, they will inevitably show up and sabotage our present relationships, creating a painful, repeating cycle of dysfunction.
Okay, so that was the diagnosis. It can feel a little heavy, I know, but the good news is we're not just here to identify the problem. This is where we shift to the solution. Drawing from his years of work as a counselor, the author gives us some incredibly powerful, practical, and actionable tools to start building a genuine bridge back to closeness. The author distills his entire approach down to 3 core pillars of communication that can absolutely transform a relationship from pseudo-intimate to truly intimate. Let's really look at each one. Pillar number 1, honesty in the here and now. This is so much more than just not telling lies. This is about having the courage to share your immediate, present moment feelings and experiences
as they're happening within the relationship. So instead of just arguing about the facts of who did what, you share how your partner's actions are making you feel right now, in this very moment. Pillar number 2, creating a no-blame atmosphere. This is all about psychological safety. It means you make it safe for your partner to be totally, completely vulnerable. Safe for them to share their deepest thoughts, their ugliest fears, their craziest dreams, without the threat of being immediately judged, criticized, or debated. The author shares that his own training as a champion debater was a massive liability in his personal life until he learned this. You can't debate your partner into feeling safe. And finally, pillar number 3, prioritizing the relationship above all else. This is a profound, game-changing mindset shift. It means that when you're in a conflict, your goal is not to win the argument. It's not to prove that you're right and they're wrong. It's not to gain control. Your one and only goal is to protect and nurture the relationship itself. The question you have to ask yourself in the heat of the moment is not, how can I win this fight? But what does our relationship need from me right now? This quote right here is a perfect, brilliant illustration of that first pillar, honesty in the here and now, in action. This is like a masterclass in healthy communication, all in one sentence. Let's really deconstruct it. The first part, when you talk like that, it makes me feel like you're pushing me away. Notice, it's not an accusation like, you're pushing me away. It's a statement of personal, emotional impact. It starts with I feel. It shifts the entire focus from you are wrong to this is how I am experiencing you right now. The second part, that makes me sad and anxious. Wow, this is pure vulnerability. It names this specific raw emotions. It's incredibly clarifying for the other person to hear. And the final part, which is why I keep pushing to talk about this. This connects the emotion to the behavior. It explains the why behind their actions. It's not about being nagging or controlling. It's about trying to soothe their own sadness and anxiety. Can you just feel how powerful this is? It completely transforms what could have been a nasty fight about some external issue into a deep conversation about the emotional dynamic happening between two people. And that is the space where true connection is either built or broken. So we've talked about communicating with our partner, which is crucial. But here's the catch. You cannot have a truly honest and vulnerable conversation with someone else until you first had one with yourself. And this brings us to what is often the most intimate and, frankly, the most challenging part of this entire journey, the internal work. And this is where the author does something incredibly brave. He doesn't just give us abstract theories. He shares his own raw, vulnerable story as a guide for how we can begin to confront our own inner worlds. The author uses this incredibly powerful metaphor of an inner wall to describe his own painful experience. He came to realize that he was suffering from something he calls aiwunung, which you could translate as a kind of love numbness or love inability. On the outside, he could go through all the motions of a relationship. He could say the right things, do the right things, but he couldn't feel the love. He explains that when his partners would do something incredibly loving for him, his brain would logically know, okay, I should feel happy and grateful right now. So he would act happy and grateful. But inside, he felt nothing, just a cold, empty void. Through some really intense and painful self-reflection, he traced the origin of this wall all the way back to his childhood. He grew up in what he describes as a high-conflict, high-anxiety home. His parents were always fighting, and the emotional atmosphere was just thick with tension and fear. And so, as a small child, to survive this emotionally overwhelming and unsafe environment, his mind did something brilliant. It built a protective wall. It walled off his feelings, his reactions, his empathy. It wasn't a choice. It was a subconscious defense mechanism that allowed a little boy to endure a situation that was otherwise unbearable. This one question, represents the author's life-changing breakthrough. For years and years, he hated this wall. He saw it as his greatest flaw. He blamed it for his string of failed relationships, for his inability to connect, for all the pain he had caused others and himself. He was just swimming in shame and self-loathing. But then, in a moment of total clarity during a difficult conversation, this thought, this question, just erupted from his subconscious. And it changed everything. In that instant, he realized two massive things. First, he was innocent. His inability to love wasn't some deep character flaw. It was a scar a scar from a wound that he did not inflict upon himself. And second, he realized that the wall, this thing he hated for so long, was also a part of him that had kept him safe. It was a brilliant, necessary adaptation that his mind had created to protect him. And this insight is so crucial because it allowed him to finally stop condemning himself and start having compassion for himself. He could finally embrace that lonely, scared little boy inside him instead of constantly punishing him for being walled off. The author says the tears he cried in that moment weren't tears of sadness, but of profound release. This journey of self-compassion ultimately leads to a pretty tough but also incredibly liberating realization, which the author represents with this stark idea: no cost, no love. The idea is that love isn't some passive feeling that just happens to you, like catching a cold. It is an active achievement that requires a real investment. It has a price. And he argues a lot of people avoid real love because deep down, they're unwilling to pay that price. So what is the cost of love? Well, he breaks it down. First, there's the cost of being single itself. Are you actively using your time as a single person to grow, to heal, to become a whole person on your own? Or are you just passively waiting for someone else to come along and fix your loneliness and solve your problems? That's a cost. Second, the cost of loving the wrong person. It's a risk. No one can ever guarantee that you found the one. You have to be willing to risk making a mistake to find out what you truly need and what truly works. Third, there's the cost of heartbreak. So many people stay in mediocre or even bad relationships simply because they're terrified of the pain of a breakup. But that pain, that heartbreak, is the price you pay for a future chance at real, genuine happiness. And finally, there's the cost of leaving your comfort zone. If you're afraid to be vulnerable, if you're afraid to try new things, if you're afraid to put yourself out there, you will miss the very opportunities where love might actually be found. No cost, no love. Okay, now we're going to move into a bit of a deeper psychological dive. We're going to connect the dots from our present-day relationship struggles all the way back to our past. Because every single one of us is walking around with an emotional blueprint. It's an unconscious set of rules, expectations, and reactions that governs how we behave in relationships. And that blueprint gets drafted in our earliest years through the connection or lack of connection we had with our parents. Understanding this blueprint is absolutely essential if we want to stop repeating patterns that don't serve us. So how exactly does this blueprint play out in our adult lives? A key concept from psychology that explains this perfectly is called I Ching, or transference. In simple terms, it's when you unconsciously take the feelings, attitudes, and unresolved issues from a significant relationship in your past, most often with a parent, and you basically project them like a movie onto your partner in the present. The author gives a fantastic, clear example with a couple he calls H and M. H gets incredibly disproportionately anxious and angry whenever M, her partner, tries to solve their problems logically instead of just listening to her feelings. Now, why? Is it M a bad guy? No. It's because M's behavior, while totally well-intentioned, is unconsciously triggering H's deep childhood wound. Her father was emotionally distant and would always dismiss her feelings. He would only engage with her when there was a concrete problem to be solved. So in the present moment, when M goes into problem-solving mode, M isn't just reacting to M. She is re-experiencing the profound pain of being emotionally dismissed by her father all those years ago. Her reaction feels so huge because it's carrying all the weight of the past. That is transference in action, and it happens in our relationships all the time. And this concept of transference is deeply, deeply linked to our attachment style, which is formed in our childhood based on how our caregivers responded to our needs. And what's so fascinating here and so important to understand is that the two most common types of anxious attachment, what we call anxious resistant and anxious avoidant, they both stem from the exact same core fear, a deep, terrifying, primal fear of abandonment. But look at how differently that one fear can manifest in behavior. The anxious resistant person's strategy to deal with that fear is to protest. They become clingy, demanding, they might pick fights, they constantly seek reassurance. Their behavior is screaming, "Don't you dare leave me. You need to pay attention to me right now." On the other hand, the anxious avoidant person adopts the complete opposite strategy to deal with the exact same fear. To protect themselves from the potential pain of being abandoned, they become distant, cold, and emotionally withdrawn. Their behavior broadcasts the message, "I don't need you anyway. You can't hurt me if I don't let you get close." Now, can you imagine what happens when these two types get into a relationship? You get that classic, incredibly painful dance. One person is constantly pursuing and the other is constantly distancing. A tragic cycle, both driven by the very same hidden fear.
All right, we have journeyed through the problem of the false relationship, we've looked at the tools to build a bridge, and we've explored how our past shapes our present. Now, let's bring it all together. This is the final, most empowering section. This is where we stop being passive passengers in our relationships and we start becoming the conscious architects of the connections we truly, deeply desire.
So how do we actually start rebuilding these patterns? It can feel overwhelming, but the author lays out a beautifully clear, practical, three-step process for healing these anxious attachment styles. Step 1 is understand and reflect. This is all about self-awareness. You have to start by understanding your own patterns. You have to become a detective of your own emotions. What are your specific triggers? What situations, what words, what behaviors make you feel that deep fear of abandonment? You have to know your blueprint. Step 2 is communicate and discuss. This is where you bravely bring your partner into the process. This isn't something you can fix alone. You have to vulnerably share what you've learned about yourself. You have to say the hard things, like, hey, when you do X, it triggers this old fear in me, and what I really need from you in that moment is Y to feel safe. You work together, as a team, to analyze your negative cycles. And then comes step 3, try and improve. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you put new behaviors into practice. You consciously choose to react differently. So the next time you're triggered, instead of instinctively protesting or withdrawing, you try the new, healthier response that you and your partner have already agreed upon. It's not about being perfect. It's a process of deliberate practice, making things better one small, messy interaction at a time.
Wow, this is such a powerful and honestly such a visceral metaphor. Here, the author is tackling one of the biggest reasons people stay stuck in unhappy relationships, the sunk cost fallacy. So many of us stay in a deeply unhappy, in-name-only relationship simply because we've invested so much already. Years of our lives, so much effort, so much emotion. We can't bear the thought of all that going to waste. But the author's metaphor here is so stark and so clarifying. The dead, loveless relationship is the foot in the alligator's jaws. You can try to save the foot. You can try to reason with the alligator. You can try to bargain with it, but you are probably going to lose your hand and then your arm and then your life. The only truly rational choice for your own survival is to accept the painful loss, to do what the author calls jishen, which literally means to stop the loss. You have to sacrifice the foot to save the rest of you. It's incredibly painful, yes, but it is also an act of profound self-preservation and courage. Knowing when to keep trying and knowing when it's time to cut your losses is one of the most critical skills for living a serious life.
And so, this brings us to a final, and maybe the most provocative question of all. This is one for your own quiet reflection. As we saw at the very beginning of our journey today, a pseudo-intimate relationship is defined by its no-go zones, those topics that are just too sensitive, too loaded, too scary to even touch. So I'll ask you directly, what is yours? What is the conversation that you know deep in your gut you need to have? Maybe it's with your partner, maybe it's with your parents, or maybe, just maybe, it's a conversation you've been avoiding having with yourself. This question is a direct challenge, an invitation really, to step out of the illusion of safety and step into the messy, unpredictable, but ultimately more authentic and alive space where real connection actually happens. In the end, this entire deep exploration, this deconstruction of intimacy with others, it all leads us back to one simple, inescapable truth. The quality of all of your external relationships will always be a mirror of your internal one. You simply cannot build a strong, sturdy bridge to someone else's heart if you haven't first built one to your own. The courage it takes to be truly vulnerable, the compassion required to understand another person's wounds, the strength needed to communicate with raw honesty, all of it begins with how you treat yourself. The architecture of intimacy, it turns out, is an inside job, and the work of becoming that master architect, of building a serious, honest, and courageous relationship with yourself, that work can start right now, today. Thank you so much for joining us on The Explainer.